Hi, I'm Ryan from Ratings.com. Today we'll be doing a review of the Acer Nitro XV272U KVbmiiprzx. I know. And we'll be evaluating it on our standardized test bench to see how it performs and if you should buy it. This monitor is part of Acer's Nitro gaming monitor lineup, and as such has a lot of features you'd expect of a good gaming monitor. It has a 27-inch IPS screen with a 2560 by 1440p resolution and a 170Hz refresh rate. It also has native FreeSync support as well as compatibility with NVIDIA G-Sync for a smooth, tear-free gaming experience. The XV272U KV has a fairly standard design that doesn't have any aggressive gamer-oriented features, so it shouldn't stand out too much in an office environment. The stand doesn't support the monitor very well on our unit, and there's a very noticeable wobble to the screen. It has a round base that can rotate 360 degrees and doesn't take up too much space on your desk. It also has a wide range of height and tilt adjustments, making it very easy to get the monitor to an ideal viewing position. If you prefer a mounting arm, then the XV272U has a standard VESA 100x100 mount on the back. There's a pretty standard range of inputs with 2 HDMI ports and a DisplayPort. However, the DisplayPort only has a bandwidth of DP 1.2. This means that at the max refresh rate, you'll be limited to an 8-bit color depth. If you want to get 10-bit color depth, you'll be limited to 120 Hz. Over HDMI, the maximum refresh rate is 144 Hz at 8-bit and only 60 Hz at 10-bit. It also features a built-in USB hub with 4 USB 3.0 ports and a USB-B port for upstream data. There's also an audio jack if you want to use the monitor to pass through audio to your headphones. Now, let's take a look at the tests. We'll start with the contrast. A high contrast ratio is important if you use the monitor in the dark for deep dark scenes. Like most IPS displays, the Nitro XV272U KV has a fairly mediocre contrast, so in a dark room, blacks will tend to look more gray, which is not ideal. Local dimming is a feature that controls the brightness of individual zones of the backlight. This allows for much deeper dark scenes in things like video games, as the area of dark objects can be further darkened. As a result, the overall contrast can be boosted. The XV272U does not have a local dimming feature to help boost contrast. Now, a high peak brightness is important either in a bright room to counteract glare, or if you want brighter highlights and a more impactful image, especially in high dynamic range or HDR games. This monitor has great brightness in SDR, getting more than bright enough to overcome glare in almost any room setup. However, its HDR brightness is only decent, and isn't bright enough to make highlights really pop in HDR. It's important to note that during our original testing of the monitor, the SDR brightness was very significantly dimmer, only achieving around 180 nits. Acer soon released a new firmware for the monitor, version 4B0E, that added the max brightness setting to the on-screen display. You need to enable that setting in order to get the brightness numbers shown here. Also important for a bright room is good reflection handling. The Nitro XV272U has a hazy screen coating that helps to diffuse reflections and reduce their intensity. Overall, bright rooms shouldn't be an issue at all. A potential downside of a hazy coating is if it causes small details like text to appear grainy. Text clarity is also impacted by a bunch of factors though, like the subpixel arrangement. Overall, it's good, as you can see in these images. The screen coating doesn't have much of an impact. The top photo is with Windows ClearType, which helps diagonal lines look more clear. Without ClearType in the bottom image, it's alright, but does lack some subpixel detail. Good viewing angles are important to ensure details at the far sides of the screen don't look washed out. This monitor has great viewing angles horizontally and okay viewing angles vertically, so you shouldn't have any significant color shifting at the edges of the screen, which is great when sharing the screen for co-op gaming or if you sit very close to the monitor. An overall uniform screen brightness and color is important when playing video games, to avoid distracting areas that are overly dark or bright. This does vary between units, but we expect this Nitro XV272U KV we bought to be about typical. The overall screen has a very similar brightness, which is great and shouldn't be an issue. The black uniformity on our unit is mediocre. There's backlight bleed in the top left corner and clouding throughout. This does change from unit to unit quite a bit, so keep in mind that yours could be better or worse than ours. Accuracy in the standard sRGB color space is important as it's the standard for computer use. This monitor has a specific sRGB color mode, which is excellent as it clamps the colors for accuracy and to avoid an oversaturated image. It has excellent out-of-the-box accuracy with almost no perceptible issue with color accuracy or white balance, which is great if you don't have the tools to calibrate it yourself. If you want to take full advantage of this monitor and display vivid colors in things like high dynamic range or HDR games, then the XV272U is a good choice. It has great coverage of the commonly used DCI P3 color space, but only okay coverage of the wider Rec 2020 color space. A high refresh rate is important for gaming. It allows the image to be drawn on the screen faster, which makes it more responsive. And if the monitor supports variable refresh rates, then you can get a smooth experience without tearing regardless of the changing frame rate. The XV272U KV boasts a respectable 170Hz refresh rate, and both G-Sync and FreeSync support means compatibility with new NVIDIA or AMD graphics cards. However, like most monitors, the G-Sync compatible feature only works over a DisplayPort connection. Do note that when we originally tested this monitor, we had compatibility issues with FreeSync over HDMI, but with the new firmware update to 4B0E, we no longer had any issues. When playing video games, a fast response time is important for the clearest image without distracting blur. The XV272U has excellent response times at its max refresh rate. At a recommended normal setting, there is only slight overshoot and there's very little blur behind moving objects. You can try the off overdrive setting, which is a bit slower but has no overshoot. If the frame rate drops when you're gaming, then luckily the response time is still excellent. The off setting is preferable at 60Hz, since the overshoot is more noticeable at lower frame rates. If you want a set and forget mode, we would recommend just leaving it at off, since the response times are excellent across the refresh rate range with this setting. If you really want the clearest image when playing fast-paced games, then black frame insertion or backlight strobing features are useful to reduce blur caused by the persistence of an image during a full frame. The Nitro XV272U KV can flicker the backlight between 120Hz and 170Hz, depending on your input signal, which is great for the clearest image. You also can't use black frame insertion when VRR is enabled, so you do need to make the trade-off between extra clarity or responsiveness when changing frame rates. Now, a low input lag is really important for a responsive feel when playing video games, and unsurprisingly, this monitor is excellent due to the 170Hz refresh rate. At both max refresh rate and at 60Hz, the input lag is extremely low. So this brings us to the main question. Should you buy this monitor? Well, firstly, it's definitely an impressive gaming monitor. It has most of the features you would want, including a high refresh rate, VRR, and BFI. The response times are spectacular at both the max refresh rate of 170Hz and 60Hz. It also has a wide color gamut, making the colors in HDR games look nice and saturated, although it lacks the brightness and contrast to really make the most of it. Unfortunately for the Acer Nitro XV272U KV, there is a lot of competition in the mid-range 1440p gaming monitor space. The most direct competitor to this one would be the Gigabyte M27Q. It's the same size, with the same resolution, and same refresh rate. They have very similar specs overall, but the M27Q gets slightly brighter in SDR and has a wider color gamut. The M27Q also tends to be less expensive and has a USB-C port and built-in KVM switch if you want to use the same setup for gaming and office work. The Nitro does have better response times and ergonomics though. The biggest downside to keep in mind for the M27Q is that it has a BGR subpixel layout, which can cause some minor text clarity issues. If you want to learn more about it, check out our video on the M27Q. If you're looking for the best 1440p gaming experience and don't mind spending more, then consider the Acer Predator XB273U, which has a whopping 270Hz refresh rate and excellent gaming performance. If you want something better for darkroom performance with a higher contrast, then check out the Samsung Odyssey G7 LC32G75T for a fast VA panel with some of the best gaming performance on the market.